So in this lesson, we are going to be finalizing the trivia database game. So all of the content is coming from the open trivia database content. And you can generate the endpoints on their website under the API option. So once you've made the connection, you can create and style the application as needed. A lot of this lesson is going to be styling. So we present the user with an option to dynamically generate the endpoint from our website. And once that gets generated, we generate the web URL, the endpoint, make a fetch request to that endpoint, and return back the questions accordingly. So these questions, we've applied some styling so the user knows which are correct, which are incorrect. And then there's also scoring that we have for the user. So if they get it correct, then they get a score, a point for it. And if they get it incorrect, there's no scoring. And at the end of the game, they get presented with what their score was. So we got 2 out of 3, and then they can make a selection again and launch a new game. We've only added in the 3 categories. So that's optional as well. You can add and update categories and really make a robust, interesting web application, all driven with dynamic data. And that's all JSON data coming from the database, the Open Trivia API. So we're wrapping it up and applying styling and also bug fixes and tweaks to the application. Once you're coming to the conclusion of your application, you're going to have to play through it a number of times in order to make sure that it's working properly. So we still do have a few bugs where we've got to make your selection, so that's still showing up. So what we want to do is, instead of hiding those, we just want to hide the output 1. So setting the display properties of output 1 to none. And then we don't have to worry about the inputs and the buttons. And then once the game concludes and we're ready to relaunch the game, then we can just update the display properties of output 1 and show that. So let's try that and see how that works. So we've got 2 questions. And let's do a refresh. So make your selection. So what's happening is we're not returning back any content from the selection. So let's again check into and see what the issue is here within the web URL. And we're still generating that. So let's copy the link address and make a request directly to it. So we're not getting any results for it. So this is one way to troubleshoot it. If you're not getting anything back, then there might be a problem with the structure. So let's see if we change it to category 2. Category 3. And again, we're not sure what is wrong here, so let's try it out. And we'll just take the general knowledge and recreate the structure. So we want to do difficulty easy and the number of questions to 2. And we'll see what type of query string is created. So it's actually under category 9, so there was no category 1. That's why we weren't able to load anything. So let's update that. And general is actually going to be under number 9. So try that one more time. So it actually wasn't a coding error, but it was what we were getting returned back on the data. So it looks like it is working once again. And correct answer, move to the next one, correct answer. And now we see we've got game over, make your selection. And another thing you might want to track is a score. So score, because we already have a global object for a game, let's do the score value and set the score to 0, and then update the game score every time we get it correct. So going down to where we're tracking and getting the correct answer. So all the way down here where we've got the correct answer. So take game score, and we're going to increment the score by 1. So just ++ on the score. And when we restart the game, then we want to set the game score back to 0 and set that to 0. But before we do, then we can say your score was, and then add in the game score here. And then afterwards, we're resetting it back to 0. So this way we can output it to the user. So the game score was out of, and then whatever length we have for the questions. And let's add a div to this so we can apply some styling to it if we need to. And I usually do the styling at the end, so let's try this and play through it. So your score was 2 out of 2, and we can launch a new game. Correct, your score was 2 out of 2, so there's a problem there, that the game score is always increasing. So let's update and append to the H1. So we can take the contents of H1 wherever we're updating it and update it as the score value. So wherever we're incrementing the score, and I believe I added it to the wrong spot there. So that's why the score was increasing. And let's do H1 and set the text content and do a score. So we can output whatever the current question is. Question, and that is going to be contained within the game object. So going down to the question, and because it's index based, so we're fine, we don't have to update it. We can say that our current question is that of, and going into the game question and length, that's where we've got the array. And let's add in the score, and that's coming from the game score. So this is just providing the user more information about what's happening. So and let's output this every time the question is answered. So question 1 of 2, score 1, because I got it correct. And question 2 of 2, score 2. And that gives us the output. Question 1 of 2, score is 0, got it incorrect. So we might also want to output this value as soon as we launch the question. So there's a number of places. So we can also create a function that updates the scoreboard. So that function is rather long, and oftentimes you might want to break apart that question. And actually it's fine, I guess, to say questions selected. And then when we're outputting on the page, that's where we can update the score. So score 0 of 2, and score is 0. Score question 1 of 2, score is 0. Question 2 of 2, score is 0. And you can update this as needed. Play through it a few times, just make sure that everything is working as expected, and now we can apply some styling to it. You can also break apart these long functions so that it is easier to read. So we could pass in the answers object, but then we'd have to make sure that any of the values that are within the parent scope we need to pass in as well. So that's going to take a little bit of time. So I'm going to leave it as is, but if you wanted to, you could simplify some of these functions where if you are passing in, and if you're creating a separate function to handle this, then make sure that you're passing in the object information as well as the contents from the parent scope that you need in order to address and properly build the content for the page. So everything does look like it's working as expected. I have played through it a number of times, and now we're ready to apply some styling to this interaction and also to update some of the content within the H1 So let's add the text content and set that to trivia database game, and update that. So we can leave that as is. And going into the HTML, let's take a look and see what we want to update. So we want to update output, so apply some styling to output. So select the element class of output. Let's give it a width of 80%. Also a margin of auto, so that's automatically centered. And I'm going to also add a border around it. And we can also have a slight background color to it if we want. And I'm going to stick to a fairly grayscale type format. And let's add some padding. And going over to the Google fonts, let's select some Google fonts. So bring that as well into the project. And this is all optional stuff. So whenever you finish your application, then just apply whatever styling you find necessary. And of course, you can just go with a basic application if you want to focus on just the regular JavaScript and the syntax for it. So bring in some styling. And I'm also going to apply styling to the borders. So applying it all to do the box sizing and the border box for all of the elements. And then also let's select for the body object and set the font family. So see what that looks like. Let's select some styling for the input. And also for these buttons, we want to apply some styling. So for output itself, for the question, so that's going to be the first div within output. So we can select it this way, output, and get the first div. So let's update the font size. So there's our question, nice and big. And we can also select and update the buttons within output. So within output and any of the buttons. You can also create classes and apply the classes to the elements. So let's add in some padding. Update the cursor to a pointer. And setting the border. And I'll update the color of the font to be white. And let's do a background color for the buttons. And I'll see what blue looks like. And actually we want to stick to grayscale. So I'll set it to this grayish color. Let's see what that looks like, and also add in some margins around it, so there's some space between them. And you can also update the font size of this one as well. And I'll make more padding, and then we can add in a border radius. Now, these are all optional, so depending on what you want your buttons to look like. And I think that turned out a little bit too big, so let's make them smaller. So we've got our buttons. For the div, let's set the margin to auto. And for the buttons themselves, do a text align and center align the content. So we've got the message here, you got it correct. And let's also update the you got it correct, so the message to the user. And whatever answer that they've provided, I use the backticks and update the code here. And let's update for output, and for small tags within output, we'll do a text align and center align it. And then also let's set a font size for those small ones. So 0.6 EM. Let's see what that looks like. Cube was correct. And we can also even add in that, so even if it's incorrect, and use the backticks. So even if we get it incorrect, and next question. So we get incorrect, single was correct. And actually that shouldn't be sending that, it should be sending whatever the correct answer was. So that way we see what was the correct answer. And this is just providing more feedback and information to the user. And it's up to you how you want to build the content. Let's also update the inputs here. So when we're creating the initial output area, where we've got the make a selection. And for the H1, we'll do a text align and center align the text. So that will just center align that content. And also within this element where we've got the content, make your selection, let's add in some styling into that. And I'll just call it box for the styling. So text align, center. And where we set the content for output, we'll also apply it to box. And then we create the element, the output one, using class list. We're going to add the class of box to it. So that adds the class list option there. And for box itself, for the inputs and also for the selects, Let's apply some properties. So set the font size. So that makes them bigger. And we can do a border and just a grayscale type border around it. Also set a line height. So that will set the line height for the content. Text, transform, capitalize all the text. So even the options there are capitalized. And also let's set this for the box button as well. So the box button, so make that bigger as well. And for the inputs, maybe we want to set a default width, 15%. Actually, that didn't look great on the button. So let's select the box input separately, and we'll set a width for that. And maybe slightly more. And we'll set it to 80. And that one will set the font size to 1.2. And these ones will set the font size to 1. Or actually make that one smaller, and then these inputs will be larger. Also, let's set minimum height. And we can set that to 30 pixels. And maybe we'll set it to 35. So that's to get them all fairly similar. Also adding in a margin. So there's some spacing between them. So make your selection. So the user comes in, makes their selection, how many questions they want. So question 0 of 15. And actually that's not going to be correct. So we need to update where we're outputting that question value. And we should add it after we update the number of questions. So that way when we start question 1 of 10, we make the selection, you got it incorrect. And if we get it correct, so let me just double check correct answer tightrope. So you got it correct. So we're still on question 3 of 10. There's our score, it's updated. So play through it, make sure the quiz questions and everything is working. And make adjustments and tweaks as needed to build your own version of the application. Tasks for this lesson are just to make sure the gameplay works as expected. So play through the game a number of times, apply any adjustments or tweaks to improve the gameplay and increase the expectations for how this function and how this application is going to function. Apply styling to using CSS as well as JavaScript as needed to present the application content, nice, neat format to the user, and then also provide messaging to the user to help guide them through the gameplay and let them understand what the next steps are and how they can get more content and generate the next set of questions for the user. So once the game is over, you can provide them scores and then also provide them an opportunity to relaunch a next round of the game.